So my name is Sharon Gartland. I'm an occupational therapist here, and I work in the Down syndrome clinic as well as some of the other clinics. Also, I am a senior lecturer in the OT program. So I'm really grateful for the chance to come and speak to you, and grateful that there are so many people interested in finding out more about how to support individuals with Down syndrome, or how to improve your own life if you're an individual with Down syndrome. And what I'm going to talk about today, I think, will go along really nicely with what Aaron and Maria talked about. That they were putting your focus on adult life and getting ready to transition to that. And that's a lot of what I'm going to kind of drill down a bit on, the things that are important to get you there. And if you are someone here today that is an adult with Down syndrome, or you are a caregiver or support person in the life of an adult, hopefully there'll be some relevant information as well for you. I start with a quote of one of my heroes in occupational therapy, Mary Law. She's a Canadian scholar and researcher, but I think it kind of sums up, as OTs, we think that involvement in life occupations, that's our word, participating in life occupations is really sort of the gateway towards getting that good life that Aaron referenced. It is how you learn more skills, it's how you connect up and participate in your family life, you make relationships. So that's really what we're about as OTs. We care about the parts and the pieces of the human function and structure that impair that, but ultimately our goal is, are you living the life you want to live? And so we're going to talk about that all the way today, from the basic self-care skills that are obviously very important, all the way to getting out into your community. Some of the predictors, this is by no means all of the predictors, but the ones that OTs particularly look at and care about are mastery of basic self-care. So for the folks with Down syndrome, and actually any developmental disability, who really go on to have pretty satisfying lives as adults, they are able to take care of all their own basic self-care. And I say that in some ways to encourage you to not breeze past that and focus on other goals, but that really mastering those things matters. It opens up all sorts of possibilities for where you can live and what you're able to do down the road. Another one is participation in household responsibilities. We tend to not think about that as much. In therapy situations, we focus a lot on the basic self-care, but life is also about contributing to the communal living situation, whether that be your family or whatever household you're in. And then finally, a really big predictor of success is, do you have a network of people? Do you have a community? Do you have natural supports outside of just your family? So we're going to look at those three and try to give you a little bit of information about how to support someone with Down syndrome for success in those areas. So basic self-care, we've studied this a lot in OT, and a study done by Leonard et al. In 2002, I pulled out a few interesting facts that I just want to highlight. One is by the age, this was looking at school-age kids, 5 to 18. By the age of 18, almost all of the individuals with Down syndrome have functional mobility, meaning they're able to get around and do the things they need to do. They're walking, they're able to manage different surfaces. So that gross motor movement, the things that a physical therapist would do a lot of work with you on, is mastered. In fact, it's mastered fairly early, closer to more like 4 or 5. It isn't always, there are still things to be kind of worked on in that area, but they get it. And so that doesn't necessarily need a lot of emphasis later down the road, but it is a strength area. So just to tie it back into participation in life, this is working off of strengths. We need to think about, how do we use this relative strength of functional mobility to plug individuals with Down syndrome, to encourage them to get involved in their community using that strength. So things that will enhance their overall health, address this risk of obesity, allow them to participate with others using that strength. I mean, oddly enough, we sometimes push individuals with disabilities to join things that we think will help them get better at a skill that they're not as strong at. And I would actually encourage us to use that skill of functional mobility to plug in more in their community and in activities of leisure. Another interesting feature, which may be really encouraging to some of you out there, I don't actually know who's represented out here today, but I know in the clinic I have a lot of conversations about toilet training. In fact, I've been called the queen of toilet training in our clinic at times, which is really, really quite an honor. And OTs, we're not proud. But what might encourage you is by 18, 96.6% of individuals with Down syndrome are toilet trained. So you're going to get there. If you're not there yet, you're going to get there. And that's by no means, it doesn't take till 18. I'll show you some statistics. But just again, that's something that we know is achieved. It's a huge piece of success, and what the kinds of things you're able to be a part of if you don't need someone to help you with your toileting. And when I say toilet trained in this case, it means that they're completely independent with it. But unfortunately, and the piece that OTs really care about in terms of how we should be focusing our intervention is self-care skills. So again, this is up to 18, so 5 to 18-year-olds. Only 60% of them were independent with self-care skills. So that meant 40% were still requiring a fair amount of supervision or prompting. They needed a caregiver involved in things like bathing, dressing, and grooming. So I say that a little bit because I think sometimes we devalue this area. We don't put as much emphasis on it as something else. And I would like to challenge you that this is a really important area to be supporting our clients and your children or you yourself working on. But why is this hard? Why are those particular basic self-care areas a challenge? One of the first reasons is a lack of opportunity. So I have a lot of conversations in my clinic where I will ask about all sorts of daily living skills, and the parents will say, oh, we haven't even tried that. We just haven't gotten to that. And there's lots of very good reasons why that's happening. But that's an easy fix, right? So maybe you don't learn a skill if you haven't done it. I don't know how to do lots of things because I've never tried to do it. I've never practiced it. So the first thing is it's hard because they haven't learned to do it. Nobody's letting them do that for themselves. And that lack of opportunity means that they haven't mastered it. But secondly, fine motor skills. I'll show you in a minute some of the details of what is particularly harder for individuals with Down syndrome to accomplish. But other studies that have looked a little more particularly at basic self-care skills find that the biggest deficits, this was a study with 5-year-olds, the areas in self-care that were the hardest involved fine motor skills. And by fine motor, I mean hand function. It's that precision movement with our fingers. So you can imagine what those things are. Things like buttoning, snapping, zipping. A lot of fasteners are a big problem for individuals with Down syndrome. But also things like toothbrushing is a good example. If you think about toothbrushing, it involves everything from screwing off the top of the tube, being able to control how much force you use. Anyone have a kid that squeezed a lot of toothpaste in a big old gross glob on your countertop? So you have to be able to do that with just enough force to get just the right amount on there. You then have to do quite a lot of kind of subtle adjustments and movements with your hands to work your way around the mouth. So all of that impacts whether they're independent with that or whether they're someone that still need a caregiver to get in there and do that for them. And that's a good example, circling back to that first example of lack of opportunity. Often, with very good reasons, parents continue to do it, or they have someone else do it for the hygiene of it. They need to get their teeth cleaned. But they won't ever get better at it if they're not allowed to practice it and learn how to do it. And just a side note on this is sometimes we think, oh, and if I do a bunch of fine motor activities like strengthening and dexterity activities over here, it'll translate to them being able to brush their teeth better. Not true. They actually need to practice brushing their teeth, or they need to practice dressing in their room with their clothes. So that's back to that first point. Finally, we also know that one of the other barriers to success in being independent in basic self-care is the sensory processing challenges that are present in individuals with Down syndrome. And we know that they just are wired a little bit differently. They're typically underreactive to sensory input, which means that they just don't get as much helpful information from their body. It takes a more intense amount of input for them to know where their body is in space, to know how to move it the way they need to move it, and to accomplish the tasks that are there. And there are ways to work around that. There's not a lot of ways to fix it, to be honest, but there are ways to be aware of that and work around that. All of that adds up to needing extra practice and extra support to master these skills. So just to give you a little bit of information, I find many parents like to have a sense of what's coming, what they can expect. This is from an article that wanted to try to give a sense of when are milestones in self-care achieved. I pulled out kind of the outside, outer limit of when they're achieved. So this is 95% of individuals in this study accomplish these tasks by these dates. So a large amount of individuals mastered them much sooner. But I think, again, it should give you a little bit of hope and also encouragement to start letting your child, letting the individual with Down syndrome participate in these areas. But you'll also notice in these last, I should use my pointer here. No, too much work. Okay. The zipper, the button on pants, buttons on shirts, tying shoes. Those are the last to get there, right? Because again, that fine motor challenge is there. So the good news is, as OTs, we are really willing to be creative about how important is it that you learn to tie your shoes, because we can work around that. What's more important and what I would like to see is individuals being able to completely dress themselves. And if we need to adapt around that, that's very, very possible to do for a lot of different areas of function. So how to help in this area, as you might have guessed, work with an OT. I like to let families know when they first come into our clinic and maybe just had a child with Down syndrome, we're going to come in and out of your life. We can be very useful resources as OTs. Don't hesitate, even if you're an adult, go back to an OT. We are trained and sort of excited about problem solving with you. What is it you want to be able to do, and how can we figure out how to make that happen? I would say also, if your OT is primarily through the schools, you want to think about seeing if they might share with you what they're doing at school functionally so you can carry it out at home. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation where kids are learning to do laundry at school and they're not doing any of it at home. And I think there's something wrong there. We're working on this skill. They need to start participating in it at home. I would also challenge you to make sure that your school is adding in functional IEP goals. And as I said before, providing regular practice in daily life routines. Another piece of encouragement is focus on participating rather than perfection. So even if they're not able to do all of it, let them participate in it. It's really important that even a portion of it, people have a say, maybe in how much toothpaste is used, or what type of toothpaste is used, or even you going in afterwards and finishing it up more thoroughly, they can participate at the beginning. So think participation and not perfection. And then the other is, don't necessarily tackle all the skills at once. Prioritize. Think about what would make the most difference in our life. And that takes us back to toilet training often. The biggies that I hear are toilet training, sleep, working on bedtime routines, and then feeding issues. So what would make the most difference in your family's quality of life if we made some progress in this area? All right, so one that we don't talk about as much, and you probably don't get as much focus on therapeutically, is participation in household responsibilities. And I think this is a huge one because, if you think about our households, most of you, I'll do a quick survey. How many of you had to do chores growing up? I want to know who didn't have to do chores then. How did you get out of them? But that's a part of living in a family, right? And if you get a roommate, if you go on to live in a group home, wherever. What's that? It's all right. You go on to need, to participate and contribute in some way to what's going on in that communal situation. One of the researchers, again, OTs like to look at all this stuff. One of the researchers recently who looked at household chores for individuals stated that it's a way to really gain life skills for adolescents. So I would really encourage you by the time they're teens, again, even if they're not able to completely do something, to participate in the daily life of the family at whatever level they're able to do that. But more importantly, not just that they're contributing, but they're learning things like taking initiative. So give them something that they have to take initiative to do as opposed to you being involved to kind of prompt them to do it. So maybe give them a plant that's their plant to try to keep alive. I would fail at that assignment, frankly, but I don't know, but something that might be theirs that they have to take initiative. Learning responsibility, learning self-efficacy, learning that they are socially needed as a part of a whole system. Really important values that come about from participating in family and household responsibilities. So just to drill down in this research, this was a research done with 75 individuals, 25 typically developing, 25 with Down syndrome, and 25 with cerebral palsy, and looked at these three groups in regards to how much they participated in household tasks. They used assessments. There's a ton of assessments that will give us more information about how, what chores someone's doing or how involved they are in their community. In this case, this was looking at individuals ages 6 to 14. And I'm just going to give you the info on Down syndrome. I will say that all parents, regardless of the child, felt that this was something important for their child to participate in. In the case of children with Down syndrome, the strongest areas in self-care, meaning kind of taking care of you in the household, so you'll see why it's not just basic self-care, were 50% or more were successful at things like cleaning up after play, putting away their own clothes, making themselves a snack, putting laundry in a hamper, organizing their own school belongings. So just to maybe get your brain thinking, I should start requiring my child to do that. That would be a good idea. They were weakest in things like meal prep. None of the kids in that range could do even cold meal prep, like making a sandwich or something that doesn't involve a stove or a knife. And then cleaning their own room. Only 12% were able to do that. If you flip over to family care, the strongest areas, there was much less involvement with this group of kids in kind of broader family-related care. So 20 to 30% were involved and successful in cleaning communal rooms, setting or clearing the table, taking out the garbage, or care for plants and pets. And the weakest areas, again, were meal prep and laundry and cleaning the bathroom. I don't really blame them for that one. And just to give you another list, and mostly I'm throwing these lists up here. I actually really dislike these developmental lists because I think they can just be depressing. But I throw them up there to give you ideas. Here are goals. I don't really care when someone masters something, but if they have the potential to do it, then let's give them opportunity to learn it. So this is a list, and I have a handout. I think they're piled right there if anyone's interested in this. That includes this list of a whole bunch of the tasks on this chores research that was done. And it just gives the details of the various areas that were worked on. So I'm gonna, this was a different research than the one I just talked about, but it's for kids at 16 to 19 years old. And what was telling about this research is that there's a fair amount of areas for an individual with Down syndrome that they have not even come close to mastering. And my question is always, is it because they can't do it or because they haven't yet learned to do it? So a question to ask yourself, is this something that they could do and we just haven't allowed them to have a chance at learning how to do it? So what's going to help in the area of chores? Start early. Actually, I'm not really recommending little kids mow the lawn. just thought it was a cute photo. But don't wait to do this. Like, the child does not have to be independent with all their basic self-care to start contributing to family life. You know, even if it's they help clear the table. Or they throw, laundry down the chute. But giving them the message along with anyone else in your family, you're a part of this system. Let's participate in it. We need you to be a part of this system. I would also say being intentional about removing supports as their skills improve. So if you think about it, it's easy to kind of get stuck in a rut. And I find a lot of families that will this is just their routine, and this is what I do, and this is how we get through life. And, I go in and I wash their hair, or I go in and I do their laundry. And you need to think periodically, and that's what I try to use our clinic appointments to do is, do you need to keep doing that, or could they start taking over more of that? We have a term in child development that's called scaffolding, and sort of remove some of that scaffolding as it's no longer needed. If the child needs it, great, provide it and help them to have success and feel the energy of that success. But stop and think, am I doing more than is needed right here for this person? Could I back off a little and let them take over? The challenge is kids and individuals with Down syndrome aren't necessarily going to push you away as much as someone else might. They might kind of be okay with you taking care. There's a lot of kind of built-in culture of passivity. Like, okay, people do this for me. And so you may have to be intentional as being a person in their life to say, you know what, I think you can do it. It's a new day. We're going to let you start putting away your own laundry, or we're going to let you start doing the sweeping, or whatever it is the task might be. I would say, again, prioritizing your goals. Don't try to tackle everything. Don't go home today and say, okay, you are taking over this, and this. That's not fair. So think to yourself, what would be most helpful? Again, what's most helpful? What would take off some stress from family life? What's going to most point someone towards their eventual goal? Like, oh, you want to move away and move into that group home? Let's make sure you know how to pick up your room or make your bed or whatever skill is needed. So try to prioritize and pick a goal that's going to move someone towards a meaningful outcome and the hoped for future. So I would also say we can get a little too fixated on you have to do a task the way that typically developing people do it. So I'd also challenge you, like, is there another way to do this? Can we adapt around it? Can we modify the task? Is there some way to make it more simple? So that's a good role for an OT. And often OTs are less involved when someone is we have a lot of involvement as children and then less involved as adolescents and adults, but I actually think it's a great time to pull in an OT and to say, we're working on household chores, could you help us think about how to modify this and make this work? So another plug, I don't get any kickbacks if you call your OT, just so you know. So finally, the topic that's near and dear to my heart is community participation. This happened to be my doctoral research. It's another area that don't wait. You don't have to kind of master everything. You don't have to even be toilet trained to be out in your community, right? You should be starting right away. And I think that our communities are the better for it. So this isn't even about, I don't know if I should bring my child to the store, or I don't know if we should, ask if they could be part of this club over here, this swim team or this soccer. I think that our society needs it. So I'm a big fan of inclusion, not just because it's a right of individuals with disability, but I think we are a better society for it. So if I can challenge you to rethink any of your hesitancies around that. It's important because, here's a biggie, kids whose whole social world and interaction besides family is their school. If all they know is school and maybe some therapists, then they get out of school, they transition out of an educational system, and they have no one but you. And that's not a situation anyone wants. So putting in place natural supports, communities of people that know you and are rooting for you and might, network for you, and hey, I think, maybe you could help do pet care for the neighbor over here, and they might think about ways to be a part of your life in supportive circumstances. So that has to start early. It shouldn't start at 18 or 21. It should start really from birth. So think about that as a family. How do I establish some natural supports in the community as we're engaged and involved in the community? The other reason, another reason community participation is really important is it gives a motivating context for skill development. So I get frustrated, there's a lot of research on community participation that, we're gonna practice and practice and practice social skills, and in hopes that someday you'll be ready to go out and interact. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Just go out and let's start working on it in that context. And you can do both, you can do back and forth, but the truth is we gain the skills, again, back to that very opening quote, by doing these things. So research is supporting this now. This isn't just Sharon's opinion, but research is supporting that by engaging out in the community in social interactions, in daily activities, you actually gain skills in those areas. It is absolutely correlated, which is, again, not news to anyone, with increased life satisfaction and success as adults. It also supports family life together, and I'll explain that in a minute, but families don't just want to sit at home most of the time. So if you're not feeling like you can go out to the concerts on the square or other things that are available, that's going to limit your family life. And like I said, it enriches our communities. A few things we've learned from the research in this area is that there is limited diversity and intensity. So there's similar involvement on just kind of a superficial level of looking at community participation for individuals with Down syndrome, but the type and the sort of actual engagement in it and involvement is not the same. They tend to be more involved in solitary and sedentary leisure tasks. They tend to only be involved in informal rather than formal activities, individuals with Down syndrome, and the individuals that do have more success and more satisfactory involvement do tend to have a higher level of cognition and motor and communication skills. And they're not necessarily inclusive involved. They're in activities in the community that are designed for individuals with developmental disabilities. So they're not inclusive within the community. So just to give you some ideas about what kinds of things you might think about participating in as an individual with Down syndrome, there's a whole gamut of them that I've listed here. And I think, again, setting a goal is just to think outside of the box. Like, what would we like to do? What are our other kids doing? What do I enjoy? What might my child or this individual that I love who has Down syndrome want me to be a part of? And then you want to think about how to select a goal within that. So there are barriers. There's a lot of research that looks at the barriers. And one of the things that I think is interesting, again, we think, oh, it's barriers because they have Down syndrome and they have these challenges that make it hard for them. Actually, the barriers more often are coming from the environment. So when they study these things, it's what is keeping someone from doing this. It has to do with the cost, the transportation, the supports that aren't available, the way it's physically laid out, the sensory qualities of the environment. So the safety issues that might be at play there, the weather, all of those sorts of things. So that's good news in that rather than, again, thinking we've got to fix someone and fix their communication abilities or cognitive abilities, we need to focus more on what can we do within the environment to support this person to participate. And again, some suggestions as how to meet those goals. Start early. I already gave you my spiel on that. Set incremental goals. So maybe the first is just to show up and be there, and that's a huge success, to just get the courage to go. And then you think, what's next? Now that you've gone, maybe the courage to participate a little more and be a part of things. I worked with an individual who went for 2 years to their church youth group, and then finally we talked about what's it going to take? What are you going to need to feel the courage to actually start speaking and participating and communicating in the activities that they do? So incrementally increasing the participation involvement in the community. Think always about how do we adapt the environment to support. So think, what would it take for that to work? And what can we make that happen? And don't assume, I've also done a fair amount of working with families on call places up and say, I have a young person that would like to volunteer at your pet shelter. You know, what would we need to do for you to be okay with that? And see if they'll problem solve with you. And again, guess what? Your OT can be helpful here. So feel free to bring that up and ask them about it. So just to wrap up, traditionally, therapeutic intervention has been focused on kind of fixing the deficits. And increasingly, our research is around this idea of participation and supporting ability for individuals to participate in activities in their life that are important to them or their family. And often the most effective way to get there is through adaptations or modification of the task, or making adjustments within the environment. So just to challenge you to think that way if you haven't already. So thank you. And